and oh, I got it, that's recording. And thank you for inviting me. It's really nice to be here with all of you for this 2 hour, which is a rather long session, but I hope we are going to have a lot of fun during today. I can see there's more people coming in. So yeah, maybe a few more things about me. I mean, you think you had already quite a wide introduction of me, but I do have a background in the creative agency, in IT, and in digital agencies. And it was through my last 3 years as a CEO in a digital agency that I came across this work. We had done a big transformation in the company by my lead. I did not call that a transformation. And because of that, I got to go to a conference in Halifax. I saw someone was from Halifax here. Yay, hi. And that's where I met Bill Tolbert. I met him at one of the dinners when he encouraged everybody to tell something that is meaningful to them, something personal, a story about themselves. And I decided to tell about the change that happened in the organization. And after the dinner, he came up to me and he said, "Do you have any idea how rare it is to lead a transformation that you have just described?" And I was like, "No, I don't use the word transformation. I've just been doing things the way that it's felt right in the moment." And so that's how I came across this work. This was in 2013. And I started reading about it, and it had a really big impact on me because I realized that how I felt I was really odd and different and didn't fit in was actually one of the reasons that I was effective and successful in the organization. So this is a little bit about me. I'm also a mother of 3 teenage, one of them is actually an adult boys. So I have a lot going on at home as well. But before we start, well, let's say just what we're going to do today is kind of getting a bit of an overview of this work. Adult development, constructive adult development. Also, think about where does it come from? What is it? Why does it matter? And then dive into the action logics and just a little bit into action inquiry, but not much. So that's what we're going to do today. And I really hope this is going to be like a bit of a conversation. You're going to get into breakout rooms. But I do want you to give me feedback, to have questions, to challenge me, to like get us into, we're not that many on the screen, to get us into a conversation together. But I'd like to bring a few principles of the way in which we work in Amara collaboration. And one of them is that we say that we believe that people think more than they think they know. If we just only take that pause and dive into our quality thinking. So if we just stop to inquire, we actually know more than we think we know. That's one. The other one is around development and kindness. And it's very easy when we now are going to go into a developmental frame to look at there's something is better or something inverse and, oh, I'm not good enough or I should do it in a different way. But I really invite us to, at least in this session, but overall, to be kind to ourselves for not being perfect. And also kind to others for not being perfect. If we were perfect, it would be a little bit boring. Not being perfect is human, and that's really beautiful. And if we could look at development with curiosity about ourselves and curiosity and humbleness, then it turns out to be a lot more fun and exciting. But actually, before we dive into the content, I'd like for everybody to have a chance to speak. So I'm going to ask Maria to actually send you into, and me too, in all of us, into breakout rooms of 3 people. And if you could just say your name, where you're from, and what hopes you have from today. And each of you have about two minutes to introduce yourself and tell how you're coming in. So can you, Maria, open the rooms for us?
Yes, just added you, Heidi, as well, so you get to be part of the conversation. 6 minutes I've set for you guys. See you back here soon and enjoy.
Before the very last minute, do you need to come back? Well, I'd like to hear from a few of you, or if you had something specific in the breakout room, or something that you would wish to, or you hope for, or wish from today. Anyone? What hopes do you have?
We have said, okay, go ahead.
You're next then.
My camera's not working. Oh,
don't worry. I often look at this in terms of other people and them learning about themselves. So I'm also going to be self-reflective today to learn about me as well. That was my thinking. Who's next?
We have said that, we need to know more about, the action logic, the topic of tonight. We need just, to discover it more and just, to build a great networking together.
You.
Heidi, I'm curious about what it is about action logics that is such a strong relationship to transformation, both in individually and organizationally.
Great question.
So Heidi, I'm very curious that if you're a parent with 3 teenage sons, I just want to know how action and logic are even capable in the same statement. But there you go.
Someone else, or should we keep off? All right. Well, let's give this a way when you can just unmute yourself and come in when you feel like it. And I suggest we start going a bit to the presentation that I hope I'm going to be not speaking too much here at a time. But to speak already to one of the hopes that there was, and we're going to come to that later on. But you might be familiar with Bill Torbert's article, 7 Transformations of Leadership, that was featured in the 10 HBR's 10 must-reads on leadership. And one of the findings that was there could be brought into a statement that less than 10% of today's leaders actually have the capacity to successfully lead transformational change. And this relates to the research he and David Brooke were doing around later stages of action logic actually having much more capacity and being much more likely to lead transformations in themselves, in others, within teams, and in whole organizations. But we will come back to that a little bit later. So what we're really talking about here is something that we call adult development and constructive adult development. We need to remember when we are in the adult development sphere that people are really complex and how we develop is really complex. We are simplifying into theories, but it doesn't mean that that is how we actually develop. Our development is messy, and it has many spheres of the parts of the development. The part that we in constructive adult development and cognitive development is what Bill Torbert has been working with during his lifetime, and is actually where the work that we're doing in Amara is coming from, and where we do also the certification workshops for. There is a lot of research behind from many scholars, but maybe the most important one that we're going to talk about here is someone who was called Jane Lovinger, who was researching women, rather young women who were stepping into adulthood, and she was asking these women to journal during the research that she had. And she was taking them in and she was looking at the text that they were producing, and she realized that some people, some of those women were actually making a lot more complex sentences and complex thoughts than others. And that's how she got curious about it. And she was looking at, well, what does this really mean? And she created something that is Washington University Sentence Completion Test, which a lot of the adult development assessments today are based on. And this is some work that Susanne Greuter took forward, and Bill was the person who brought this into the leadership context. And that is where the 7 transformations of leadership and a lot of other work that came in. Actually, he started back in the 70s when he started doing this work. He started looking at organizations and how organizations develop, and only then did he start to look at the individual action logics as well. I'm not going to go too much into the theory of this, and those who are really interested, there is a lot nowadays written about it, and you can dive into that. I can send you links. Sorry?
Sorry.
I don't want to. Oh no, that's all right. That's all right. Well, a few things. Vertical development might be something you are familiar with. So in the way in which we have done a lot of the trainings, a lot of the adult learning has been in what we call horizontal development. So more in the frame of learning new skills, learning new techniques, expertise, really thinking about the level. This is what you are to think. This is what you are to do. And the one more growing part of development nowadays is what some call, or Nick Petrie has brought this term of vertical development, which we talk more about, like capacity development, which is thinking more about how you think, and is adding the mental complexity, emotional intelligence, and how we address like complex problems, go into more difficult, high-stake relationships, and how we operate in the uncertainty. It's not about just being either vertical development or horizontal development. It is actually, I believe, in bringing both of those together in the way in which we do learning. So looking at the more of the vertical development here, Bill talks about us having kind of starting in our late childhood with some stages that we call pre-conventional stages. So we could call them self-protective of opportunities. It's the part when we are under 10 years old, when we really focus only on ourselves and have a very immediate time span. This is a very important part for a young adult or for a child to grow up, to actually create that identity and create that sense of self. Then we often move next into what we call the diplomat action logic. And I just the other day, or it was a while ago, that I heard my oldest son tell me a story. And he was saying to me, "Mom, you know what? I have learned to say thank you and look really happy when my grandmother gives me a present that I actually don't want." And that is kind of that move into diplomat. It's like, well, how don't you rock the boat? How do you belong? And how might you even say yes when you mean no? Because you want to be part of, you don't want to go in conflict with, but you actually want to belong and be part of something bigger. Well, these both are still kind of pre-conventional and usually not the adult action logics. But then we move into the more conventional action logics, which is the expert action logic, where we look at more efficiency. We start being really great at something. We start mastering. There is a right and there is a wrong, and there is not many like gray zones. It's either like this or it is like that. And I think we have a lot of people who operate as center of gravity from expert action logic today. Then we move into the achiever action logic, which is very shortly described would be very close to the KPI world today. So really going after the winnings, the goal, the purpose, being effective, so the move from an efficiency to effectiveness. And being quite a great manager if we are in leadership positions. And then from there is that move to the post-conventional action logic. So those that are like beyond the norm, the redefining, that starts to look beyond, start inquiring more. That inquiry starts already in achiever. Start to look at like processes, being a lot more tolerant with things not being the way they always were seen to be, and being a lot more personalized. And from there, moving to the transforming action logic, which is jumping back to the first slide of less than 10% of people actually profile at transforming, which is the action logic where there is transforming and alchemical, when we see that there is consistent capacity to lead transformational change, if you have all of the other horizontal skills of leadership doing it. When we talk about transforming capacity, we could look at the action logic a way of that is the capacity. So we develop the way in which we construct our thought and how we bring that into action. But it doesn't help to just have the capacity. We also need to do something. So what is the practice that we're taking on? What is that what we actually do? And this is where action inquiry comes in, that I'm not going to talk about too much here, because we're going to look at the action logics more. But I will say a few things about action inquiry. And action inquiry is the other piece of work that I actually find more interesting. If you look at the action logics, they might be a little bit like a map of development, and then action inquiry is the way of developing. It's the way, it's the practice, it's the kind of the way of life, it's a process, a tool, a style. And oftentimes people are, well, what is action inquiry? And how we would say it's a strategic capability and a practice. And it is the moment-to-moment awareness that helps us to engage in being more timely and transforming in our actions. And it is the only approach that is statistically confirmed as reliably generating both individual and organizational transformation, which of course doesn't mean it is the only one existing. It just means that it's the only one that has the statistically been researched to do so, which is of course a difference. 2 more slides about action inquiry. Well, what is action inquiry? Well, the simplest thing is like when you do an action, you inquire, and when you inquire, you bring an action. So if I think most of us have been in a situation where we go like, we did something maybe in a meeting, and then we go after, it's like, well, why didn't I do this? So then we might haven't had an action, and then only an hour later, we're like, oh no, I wish I would have done that. If we're doing action inquiry, we're doing that loop back into inquiring in that moment, and we might be able to change what we do in that moment. And that's how it becomes really, really powerful as a way of being, as a way of process and a tool of leadership. The second thing about action inquiry is that we have 3 fields of inquiry. We might even have a 4th. But when we inquire into ourselves. You were saying, Claire, about I want to be self-reflecting. So that really noticing what is happening for me, what am I thinking, feeling, sensing, what do I want to do here? So how do I want to show up here? How do I actually show up here? And have that awareness and notice that in ourselves. That is around the first person, the me inquiry. Then there is the inquiry about second person or we, which is looking at what is going on here in between us, in our relationships, in the communication, in the group dynamic, in the power relationships. And we have the third person of inquiry, which is, or the third, which is the it. Might be the organization, the system, it might be data, it might be the rational thinking, logic. It might be often in organizations, we would say it's the organization. And when in action inquiry, we bring in together the first person inquiry aligned up with the second person, with the we, and aligned up with the whole, with the strategy and the organization. That is when we start to be able to have really timely action and transforming action if we want to. So I will stop here for a moment. Just the next slide here is about action logics. So I'll stop here to see if anyone wants to come in with something right now. And now it's almost as quiet as it is in Finland. We talk about different culture things. In Finland, people never ask something when we have. So.
I also took the online version for the team coaching, new team coaching credential. So I know what I'm talking about, and I can assure you that it's not going to change that much. ICF, I think, is collaborating
Maybe that's a different conversation
because it's going to make.
Okay. So if someone.
I just muted her.
Okay.
So what I understood now, Heidi, is from a bigger perspective, it's a reflective practice of what am I doing, what I've done, what am I learning from it, and how does that show up moving forward, but from different lenses.
So action inquiry. Yeah, it is what is. Some people. Now I can't find you on the. There you are. Yeah. So it is looking at reflecting and having an awareness and reflection from different lenses. Yeah, at the same time.
Yep.
Curious, Heidi, as well. Once I became aware of a systemic focus, so the it and our place in that, and even the wider system, it almost seems just totally logical. Does everyone get that when they're aware of it?
The system. I don't know. I think that how I experience it, which that we can be increasingly aware of the system. and layers of it and dimensions of it. And so I don't quite like when are we actually and when are we not? Is a difficult question, because I think that is also, there is a different span in which how aware we might be of the system. I think that with the system and the systems, often people talk about systems thinking, which I find is quite different than the kind of system awareness where we can notice and we actually act into the system. So we make the interventions into the system. Whereas systems thinking often is a more passive way of being, or kind of or thinking about it.
Thank you. I was thinking how is it possible for people to sort of consciously, with reflection, turn up the volume on a focus on it?
I think so. I think we can do a lot of practices to develop, and I think we can do a lot of practices to develop our systems awareness as well. Yeah, that's what I believe. Yeah. But I don't know if I'm right, but that's my experience. And then I think I'm going to dive into the action logic. So action logics, we had a short version of the pre-conventional, the conventional, and the post-conventional like action logics. But we can look at that as they are. There's many metaphors, but maybe it's our operating system, the way in which we make meaning, how we look at the world, and how we interpret ourselves and others and in the external world. So this is the way in which we make meaning, how we construct our thought about that, and how that becomes into our behavior in ourselves, whether it's through inquiry or in the outside world. And we do them compass, these are developmental. So as we move from one, or we inhabit a next action logic, we still have the earlier action logics inside of us, and they still operate from the earlier action logics. But we might start operating out of a new action logic when we develop into a new. And it is not something that is static. During the day, we operate from several action logics. So we're not in a box that this is who you are and you cannot change. We operate out of several action logics, but we tend to have a center of gravity. So one action logic that we operate mostly out of. And then it also tends to be contextual. We might operate out of one action logic when we are at work, and then we might operate out of another action logic when we go to our childhood home, or we meet with our childhood friends where we used to operate in a different way. That is quite normal, that can happen. And the later action logics can take more, can operate in more and make sense of more complexity and wider time spans, can take more uncertainty, and often also pressures. And we can assess action logics. The two that we are using is the self-assessment, Shifting Horizons. And then we also work with the Global Leadership Profiles, which is based on the sentence completion work from Washington University, sentence completion. So you can think about the action logic in a way as the Matuskasta, the Russian dolls, that in some ways, when our center of gravity becomes the next action logic, we kind of get a new skin, we get a new version, but we don't lose the ones we have had, we have been going through in our earlier lives. And we might act out of the smallest one, and then the next one, and the next one throughout the day. And this is really important, because very often we start to think about it, people start to think about it in a way, it's one action logic, this is how you are, and this is what you do. And that's not how it is. Here's also an illustration of how the thinking becomes more complex. So this is a splatter diagram from on the left side of the earlier action logics, where people tend to say the same things to the sentence completions in some, or very similar things, whereas in the action logic, the thinking, the thoughts, and the things that are put together become more unique and more complex. So as an example, there is one of the sentences that is in many of the Washington University or the sentence completions that is a girl has a right to. And a lot of people write the same as a boy. This is not unique thinking. This is what we've kind of been programmed into say. And that is a way in which how it becomes kind of normative. Whereas a later action logic would create a lot more unique way of inquiring into and thinking about it. Yes, so we will be now going through each of the action logics one at a time. And I want to check with you. Do you all have like a paper and pen with you somewhere, or can you bring that? If you don't, if you have it close to you, it would be great to bring something so you can journal with. So let us start with the opportunist action logic. And so the opportunist action logic is all about me being at the center of the world. It is, if someone comes in and disturbs my world, it is a threat and I'm pushing that out. And it tends to be quite reactive to things, having a very short time span. And I'd like to take an example of one of my friends whose action logic is not opportunist. But when she drives her car, she drives in a way where she thinks everybody else are idiots and they need to move out of the way because she needs to get first. And you could say that in that moment, we operate out of the opportunist action logic in a way it's all about me. I need to have short wings so I get past the car and I can just go. So it has a lot of like energy in it. Any kind of criticism is seen as an attack towards you. In the organizations, if we have people operating out of the it sometimes might be a good thing that people don't hesitate, but actually seize the moment or see the opportunity and just go for it. Not necessarily always, but there might be moments that might be a really great thing to be able to take risks. Every action logic has a beauty and every action logic have a shadow. And one of the beauties that I have realized through my work with, especially with female leaders, is that we tend to, in childhood, adults and parents tend to want to have girls more to go into the kind girl who's operating more at the diplomat action logic. I also know men who have not had the chance to operate out of opportunist action logic. And sometimes it's great to kind of really work with, well, where are my boundaries? Where do I say no? When do I not let people come in? It's kind of that healthy part, which might be really, really great for us to still kind of like do development in our own opportunist. It is, of course, different from every person of how our development is, but that is just an example of someone. So if you do have your pen and paper, maybe just write a little bit about yourself if you remember something from your opportunist, or if you notice something in yourself that when you might operate out of opportunist. Just kind of think about that for a moment and maybe write that down. At what point have you been operating opportunist, or you might have very recently operated out of opportunist? And I can say that probably no one in this group has a center of gravity of opportunity. That does not mean that we never operate out of.
It's really interesting as well, Heidi, because some of it's, when you said there's a sort of shadow side, and the bit that really stands out to me is that sometimes even with physical power, and it's amazing what reaction you can get to certain triggers, and that's I don't know why, but that was a really interesting bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we tend to sometimes look at the early action of logical being bad, and they're not bad. They're valuable development stages of our lives, and for us to the development, especially at the very later stages, is to actually develop in all of the different action logics. Our opportunities, our diplomat. I'm going to move into the next one, to the diplomat action logic, which is conforming, coming together, wanting harmony, being part of and belonging. So you might know, like from often in teenage, we go into wanting to be part of the group. The other day I saw a group of girls, 6 or 7 of them, being in the tram, and they all had the same leather pants and they all had the same shirt. It's like you have that uniform that actually brings you all together in a way. And diplomat is often, when we start coming into a new group, we act out of diplomat. We don't start to have a big fight. We actually try to find the commonalities and start to find where do we connect and how can I be part of something, belong to something. Also in diplomat, the feedback is something that is not very welcomed at all. And the diplomat does not want conflict if there is a possibility of not having conflict. Where it can be a challenge is if someone in a leadership position goes into a room and agrees with someone about something, and then someone else comes into the room and has a completely conflicting thing and agrees with that person as well. So kind of agreeing always with the person who was the last one in the room becomes really challenging in a leadership position. And so this might be one of the downsides, even though there is many parts that are very beauty, such as being very loyal and warm and trying to really get the group together. So maybe here you could think about a time when you have joined a group, and what is your way of coming into diplomat? What is kind of your diplomat action logic? next one, and then soon I will have a breakout. The next action logic is the expert action logic. And this tends to be when we move into adulthood and we start to master something and we start to be great at something. We know how it's done. We're looking at what is wrong and what is right. We tend to see things as black and white, and there is not much gray. Oftentimes wanting to solve problems in kind of finding the rational way of doing it. Acting out of expert is open to feedback, but only if there is someone who was in the hierarchy are higher, or then actually you know that that person knows more in one way or another. But if someone gives feedback and is not the person you would trust to know more or has a higher position, then that feedback is often not welcomed. Yeah. One of the stories of my expert was working in one of the IT companies, and I was working as the HR, and I had been reading about employment law, and I actually believe that I did know almost anything about employment law, and if I didn't know something, I could always find out. And it gave me that sense of real confidence, which can be like really liberating at the expert action logic. Also, there is so much beauty in the fact of getting all of the details right. And in the way of, there are things in organizations, especially, that you are to do out of expert action logic. That there are things that you make a logo on in advertising, or you do bookkeeping, that there is a wrong and there is a right, and you have to kind of stick to that. Just because people do those kind of work doesn't mean it's their action logic, but it means that operating out of a way where we believe this is a right and this is a wrong, and this is the only ways it can be. That is when we operate out of expert action logic. And I'm going to do one more, and then I want us to go into breakout rooms. You can have a little bit of a conversation first, but then go into breakout rooms after that. So the next action logic is achiever, which is really about goals and purpose. And we don't need, when we talk about goals and purpose, so getting from somewhere to somewhere else, this can also be about goals and purpose for meditating. It can be about cooking. It can be any part of our lives when we are really goal purpose oriented. So it's not necessarily only about achieving something in an organization, which is easily done. Through the achiever action logic is when there starts to be inquiry. So the earlier action logic doesn't have much inquiry, but in the achiever action logic, it is started. And there is that sense of bringing people along, getting feedback to bring people along, because that offers the way of improving. Feedback from people, getting people together, but together we can do things better, looking further into the future. And you can say there's quite a lot of energy into feedback, or while there is some success, there is a lot of joy coming out of that. And if people do not meet the high expectations, there can be easily some frustration and some guilt. One of the things that is very typical of achiever is the time is limited, and it is a scarcity. So independently of how much time people have, it is often seen as, I don't have enough time, I need to battle with the time. I don't know how to do around the time. So this is, you could say that the achiever action logic is the action logic that is really valued in organizations. has been valued in organizations for a long time for the way of getting things, being purposeful, being on target, having the objectives, and moving into that effectiveness. I'm not going to read things out of here. But now if you think about yourself again for a moment, about an achiever, and what is it that you are most proud of? What are you most proud of achieving? And how the achiever action logic might have had a stake in that. Here. See if there is something you would like to comment on or ask about, or say. Value success and also the game. Yes. So now I'd invite you to go into trios and then tell a story about yourself from out of any of these action logics.
How long do we have, Heidi?
What if we had 3 minutes per person? So that would be 9 minutes in total.
I'll set 9 minutes for you.
And now it would be.
It's all
Yeah,
my
it would be one. I can hear that some were really going still for talking when you're coming back. But I'd love to hear if there's something you would like to share from the groups.
We had
or anything else.
We had a great discussion. We were talking about it from different perspectives, like different characters when you're delivering training, and the way we need to be to support where they are. Really interesting.
Yeah.
That was
And an achiever's motive, Mike.
No, I was just because that was something that came up with us, Claire, was that Nitha we were talking about. She was kind of saying at home she's a different person to the person she's at work, and I said I'm a different person at work every day. So it's kind of, you know, there's always this kind of, but you know, that's the thing. Perhaps this isn't specifically one thing that you adopt. It's kind of you choose on a. Is this like almost like situational leadership type stuff? Yeah, am I right in saying that? Or interesting what Heidi had to say on that.
Well, I think we do operate in different ways in different contexts. We tend to not have the capacity to move like between the action logics consciously before we are at the later stages, because it does bring that awareness of like, how do I meet this? How do I meet this context? So it's a yes and a no, but and then it has to do with what is the center of gravity action logic.
So I agree with Mark then. I'm still finding myself, I have no center of gravity. There you go.
Well, everybody has a center of gravity.
So I'm curious, may I?
Yes.
How would one define that center of gravity? How do you arrive at that?
So there is 2 ways. We're going to actually offer everyone here a free self-assessment from the Shifting Horizons that we're doing. So you can just sign up. Can you, Maria, could you, Maria, maybe copy paste the link in the chat already now? And then there is the global leadership profile, which we also certify. We certify people to use both. And the global leadership profile is something that is a pretty big. It costs almost 1,000 euros, so it's a sentence completion that is scored by people who are trained for 2 to 3 years to score every sentence, and then you get based on your sentences, you get a profile. But we have made also this the Shifting Horizon. Its name is just very new, coming out to the market, where you can do it a self-assessment, which we have seen that there is room for a lighter way to come into this work. But that's the way. Then there is also a way in doing it, which Bob Keegan has done, which is through interviews. And I think also Harvey Berger, she also does it through interviews. So there is like the 3 ways of doing it, basically. If that responds to your question.
Yes, thank you. And I had another question. May I go ahead with the second one as well? So I'm curious as to how you sort of integrate this with different personality types that you have, right? So there are various theories. How do you integrate personality types with action logic?
So for personality and action logic, I don't know all the research behind, but it's important to know that the action logics are not personality tests. So sometimes people think about that. There is some personality tests, such as Enneagram, which you know that moving towards another Enneagram number means that there is more maturity. I don't know the Enneagram well enough, but I do know that there is research with the correlation between Enneagram and action logics. So that one, that's how much I know about it. But you could say that mostly there is not with this of being introvert or extrovert. There's not such a thing as any action logic being introvert or extrovert. Any of the action logics can be that. And if you're looking at the action logic, it's more about you get more capacity. So if you're looking at where there is looking at the big picture or the detail, the action logic, later action logic will be that you have more big picture and more detail, rather than moving just to one or the other. Did that respond?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Heidi, one more nuance that might be helpful. I think that I've experienced that when you get to a later stage of development, you're not as captured by your preferences. So my personality isn't the excuse for behaving a certain way or seeing things a certain way or defending myself. I actually can be beyond my personality and kind of love myself, but also be more open and not fixed. So there's a shift in how important types are. My typology becomes just one of a number of ways I can see myself, not kind of a structured identity.
Yeah,
I hope that was helpful in not taking us off track. Sorry.
No, that's interesting. Yeah.
See that as a maturity thing as well. Obviously, not necessarily age, but I'm always curious. There was some research around if people are themselves in the workplace and home and, you know, with different friendship groups, then apparently they're happier people, as opposed to, you know, really consciously choosing to play out in a different way.
Right. So I don't know about happiness research in context to this, but then, yeah, there might be a. Can you say a little bit more about that?
So the research was saying that if we are ourselves, you know, authentic, I suppose is a good word to use, in the different contexts, and there wasn't a major conscious choice to act in different ways, for example, you know, some people have, I am now with my work hat on and I am now with my home hat, you know, so if you're the same in a number of different environments, then apparently you're a happier person overall. And I don't know the back pages of the research and how reliable and valid it was.
Right. Yeah, that of being able to be your kind of whatever that self is, because it tends to change. Yeah. Yeah, but I think that oftentimes I think we also where it can connect with action logics is like what with later action logics, we do have more choice. So then we would also have more choice to act out of our authentic self when we otherwise might not have the courage to actually do that. So, great.
So is there time for one more? Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So what you spoke about being different people, or having these different types at different circumstances, really intrigued me, because isn't that dependent on the circumstance that you're in and your behavior thereof? Isn't also your psychological framework at that point in time that defines your actions? I don't know if I'm making sense, but this just came up for me.
Yeah. So in a way, the psychological framework, when looking from the action logic point of view, is your action logic. Does
okay.
that help?
Absolutely, it does. It does.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I want to check just if the link that I now posted on a while ago, if that works better for signing up, if you want to have them. No, it doesn't work. Maria, could you check that out? And meanwhile, I'm going to continue. So if we want to go to the post-conventional action logics. So moving beyond the achiever, we could say that up to achiever, it is quite a lot of how the outside, the normative world have wanted you to be, kind of what we've been taught in school, what we've been taught that is socially acceptable, what we've been taught to, this is the school you should go to, this is the kind of work you're supposed to, this is the kind of way you're supposed to behave. And moving beyond that is moving to the post-conventional. The first action logic there is redefining that actually used to not be an action logic at all at first. It was only a transition phase between achiever and transforming. And I somehow explain that in a way of like, if you are at the theater and there is the curtains, and then you open the curtains and you find a whole new world that was always there, but you just never saw that. That is how a lot of people experience moving into redefining. So the things that we saw are still there, but they actually feel different and they look different. And it can be like surprising. It can sometimes be overwhelming. It can be, people might have a lot of different feelings. I know people who've been going through redefining who have suddenly taken all the sadness in the world. Because suddenly when we start to see more, we also take in more, and we might like take that quite heavily. It's just good to remember when we look at redefining that it tends to be very unique because from here on, the development starts to be really unique. There tends to also be quite a lot of inquiries, quite a lot of reflection and questions and wondering, and people start to want to have feedback because and behavioral feedback. I'm talking also about behavioral feedback. People in organizations, other people can find them a little bit frustrating because it might be the person who is again like, but why are we doing this? And does this really make sense? And well, could we look at it from another perspective? And if we look at it from this perspective, it's going to be different. And if we look at it from this perspective, it might be different. There might often be So there might be that challenging of those norms of how you are to be in a meeting, or challenging of the norms to be something that you you don't agree with those things anymore because you notice something different. There tends to be more going inside. So every second action logic is more going outwards, and every second action logic is going more inwards, and the redefining is going more inwards. There is really seeking for having mutuality. So this is where people want to do oftentimes shared power, but there might be like shared power in the way that there's too much shared power, and there might be more inquiry than there is advocacy, and more inquiry than actually getting forward. Not necessarily can also be very action-oriented people operating out of redefining. But that part of when we then move to transforming, then it tends to be mutual and unilateral power. So not only mutual power, but actually sometimes also taking the stake of putting yourself in the center. So that part of those goals and the target and the things you are, it's like that still matters, but it's like, do you have the right one? Is this what we are about to kind of to approach? Yeah, I'm going to take a pause and see if there is some reactions from someone, or some questions about redefining, or maybe you might have an experience of redefining you want to share.
Yeah, I can relate to this. We all went into this phase where you are exploring important topics, for example, existence or religion, finding God, right? When you move from a sales perspective into being a consultant, into being a coach. So this was a shift in mindset that was like 10 years ago. And when we are doing business as usual, and when I started studying the agile frameworks, and then it's a totally different way of managing project. So I can see these areas where I was in this specific mindset, looking at things. I wonder if that's making sense.
I think it might make sense. I mean, it is a myth that everybody leaves the organization when they move to redefining that. Some people say that, but it is one of the more likely places when people might take that step of making a change in your life, because there is that, is this according to my values? No, it might not be. So I might want to do something different. So it's not, it's not uncommon that it happens. Thank you. Thank you for the story. That's great. Anyone else?
I'm thinking as well that not everyone's comfortable with others stepping into their individuality. That's interesting when you see it play out in teams. And yeah, it's interesting as well when it's an individualist or a collective society, and the parallel between society and the teams or boards.
Yeah. There can be people who operate at redefining who are still very protecting of themselves, but it tends to be that there is more tolerance of it when moving into redefining. And then of course it comes that important part that so many of you already are talking about today, of like, is it psychologically safe a space to actually share about, and this is maybe something important to just say, that in organizations and in management teams, the context might be so not psychologically safe that management team might operate at a much earlier stage as a team than if you would put all their individual action logics together and make an average. So I've heard stories where people have said, oh, our team has only like people operating as opportunist and diplomat and maybe one expert. And then we do the GLP assessment and we have people operating at redefining a couple, and we have a couple at achiever, and we might have one at expert and no one at opportunist and diplomat. But that's a good thing to remember, that sometimes it is actually the context doesn't really allow you to bring out the capacity you have in yourself. So thank you for bringing that up in that way. So it is also a good reminder of we are not to guess other people's action logic based on seeing them in one context, because it might be completely wrong. So let's move to transforming. So we have time then afterwards to have more discussions. So the transforming action logic is the one that when doing the study and the research Bill and David Roop were doing of looking at 10 organizations over several years, looking at both the action logic of the CEO and of the consultant, and what the changes that happen in the organizations, both financially and how they were able to do organizational changes and other transformations in the organization. Only the organizations where both the CEO and the consultant were operating at transforming or alchemical action logic could you see the organization do several transformations. So this is where the capacity also comes, when people are able to choose which action logic to operate out of. So we might all operate out of the different action logics during the day, but it's a different thing if it's a conscious choice to operate out of a certain action logic in a certain time. So at the transforming action logic, feedback starts to be a real gift. So people do want feedback. People want behavioral feedbacks. People want feedback about a lot of different things, because it is like a gift and it is a way of learning. People tend to have a lot of different roles. So they are the role of something somewhere, they are in another context having a completely different role, and they tend to seek these different environments where you can operate from different roles, kind of like that gives a richness to life. The conflict is not seen as something bad, but actually as an opportunity to creatively work with. So people might still not like it, but people are not afraid to actually engage in conflict. The awareness is on self and on the surroundings. So you have the me and we and it. So people tend to, at transforming action logic, integrate the first person, the me, the second person, the we, and the third person, the it, into their inquiry and thinking and action. It is rather around processes, and people start to use both mutual and unilateral power. So in the redefining, when people wanted to have only mutual or shared power, here it is a variation of mostly using mutual power, but not being afraid of also coming in with unilateral power sometimes. There's more of, if there was more of a combination of just inquiry and a little bit of advocacy, here is advocacy and inquiry. So it is really clearly saying, this is what I think, and then also engaging in inquiry. People start seeing their shadows, so the sides that we don't like in ourselves, so we don't want to accept we have in ourselves. People start to be able to deal with complexity and be okay with the complexity. People tend to start seeing the systems. Here, that would mean that only at this stage can people see the system, but at this step, usually it happens. So there is the development mode that is deep and it's high and it's wide. It's like too many different paths. also time is a much longer time span. So the earlier action logics have a very short time span, and the later action logics gets a longer time span. What I want to say again here that I might have said in the start was that no action logic is better than the other. So no action logic is no person, according to what I know, is happier at any action logic than there is at another action logic. But if we are a consultant or a coach or a leader who are engaging with change and transformation, this is where it has value. So coming in from this context, that's when this action logic actually is favorable. But it isn't a better one in any other way. And I'm going to go into the last one. And there is some frameworks where I actually have several alchemical action logics, but the way in which we have worked and Bill's work, the only actually the latest action logic to profile is only early alchemical action logic, because we believe, and I also do believe, that very few, if no, almost no one would actually all the time act out of alchemical action logic. It is more that we have the movements of alchemy. But then we're talking about being completely present moment to moment and choose how we show up or don't show up. People, again, there is the connecting back a little bit to the opportunist and self-protecting and taking some personal risks, but here it is taking the risk in service of other and surprising other. People tend to have that sensitivity to like feeling not only what is happening with me, but also what is happening in the group. So trying to find that distinction between, is this my feelings or is this something that is with the group? That, of course, can also happen when people are very sensitive as such. A story of alchemical action logic is when Nelson Mandela went into a sports game, into his own people's, if you could call that. So we belong to the Black community. So into that place to sit, but actually wear the other team's jacket. So it was like really disturbing. It was saying yes to both and not really taking a side. And it kind of really had a fundamental shift into how people were looking at things because of what we did. So that's just an action of how the alchemical might show up. And it is not to think that it's only the Nelson Mandelas of this world who are actually operating out of alchemical. There is a lot of people who have at least alchemical moments in life, and almost all of us have alchemical moments where it is almost like time stops and things completely shift in how we're looking at something, and also together with other people. People tend to be very, very interested in alchemical, and it tends to have a lot of energy. But I think it's more interesting actually to look at the other action logics per se. I'll do one more slide until we take a pause again. So this is just the change of like, what are the things that are changing, a few of the things that are changing along the action logic. So one is like the impulse control of how it is at the early ones. It tends to be very reactive. Then people start to have the responsibility, and then to be the ones who actively take a role in resolving conflict. The structure of it being absolute, I'm talking about this is how it is. There is no option. It is black and it is white. To having more alternatives, and then to move into paradoxes. Looking at the space of being, it tends to have a more narrow local sphere of attention, and moving into more societal, and then at the later stages being more cross paradigm. How you're looking at self, it's being very, very important to look at what is the appearance, to then moving into being self-critical, and then moving to co-creation with others. So I am with others and through others. The time of being day-to-day or even moment-to-moment info-opportunist, to bring the achiever being around 2 years planning, now from now to 2 years, and in the transforming to both be several generations back or ahead, and also very moment-to-moment attention. So now I'm going to pause here to see reactions, questions, thoughts, comments.
When I think of the top one, it just makes me feel so grounded. And I also think about, you know, self-actualization on Maslow's hierarchy.
They do come all with some kind of energy. What else?
Heidi, I'm wondering if you'll cover or comment on what it is that coaches and consultants can do to accelerate the pace of development. Presumably that's the whole point of learning about this.
I think that the real juice is actually around action inquiry and the practices we can do of like practices of transformation. Well, there is many ways there's many ways you can do in order to develop, and one is I mean, which I said is starting to happen in redefining, is like going into heat experiences that are not too heat experiences, so that you're still in your tolerance zone, in a way of actually experimenting and being very aware about what is happening to me. So heat experiences is something that, so challenging moments. We might have these, just life gives them to us, in the sense of someone close to us dies, or we are in something that feels like a crisis, which is in a way an opportunity for that development. That of course doesn't mean people develop because they have a crisis happening around that, but we might be able to use that in service of our own development if we want. Some very kind of simple way of looking at our assumptions, looking at being very aware of how we use power and how we want to use power, doing a lot of self-reflection. So whether that might be to journaling or co-inquiry with other people in order to expand, finding new places where we might learn, even though it's not a heat experience necessarily as such, but kind of searching for communities that we're not normally in. We often set up things such as trios, because trio is the smallest group where you already need to take power into consideration. You need to choose in a trio who you're going to speak to. That's a few things. But
yeah, thank you very much.
I'm thinking as well about supervision for leaders, coaches, and then also, Jeff, shadow consulting. where someone's observing the leader and feeding back and reflecting with them to deepen their understanding. And then also experiential learning, the debriefs around that can just be so interesting, can't they?
Yeah. Yeah, I think experiential learning, yeah, all of those that you're saying, I completely think that are great ways. Then of course doing either the shifting horizons that we provide, or then the global leadership profiles is also great ways into. So the shifting horizons is a light way, but the GLP goes very deep into your own ways of thinking, and that can be a very transformative experience and give. So we certify people to use that, and I've debriefed quite a lot of people, and oftentimes people are amazed how you can, from 30 sentences, get so much about a person. And of course it's quite different, but it's not 1 to 10 or 1 to 6, but it is actually completely based on your own unique sentences that you have created. But there's many ways, and maybe I can here do like the small marketing. Say we wrote a book called Street Smart Awareness and Inquiry in Action back in 2018, and then the attempt was when people were actually having that same question that you just had. It's like, oh, I love all of this, but what should I do? And so we had 18 people from around the globe, and we asked them, what is your practices? And then we put them all together in a book that is called Street Smart Awareness and Inquiry in Action. And the people who contributed are all at the very late stage of Action Logics.
Oh, thanks, Heidi. I'm wondering if you would put the name of that book in the chat for us.
Yeah, I can do that.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm intrigued to learn more about action inquiry. It seems to be the sort of process behind organizational development, as opposed to, or team development perhaps, and what that looks like, what the role of a consultant might be, what sort of questions they might ask, what the events they might plan, and the interviews they might conduct, that kind of thing from a very practical practitioner's perspective.
Yeah, that's how, I mean, the action logics are kind of great, and it's the map in a way, but the work is action inquiry. I think that is where that's the kind of even almost the way of life. And what happens then with that is like how we become so the vehicle of the change. So the development for ourselves happens so we can actually do that in a different way. Just show up when we anyway are in the workshop, when we anyway do the interview, how we might show up in a way that is more transformative. That's kind of how I'm seeing how the work is, but it is super intriguing. It's
I can't wait.
My biggest passion of life. And when we started back in 2014, we already decided this is what we want to work with, even though people wanted trainings and organizations want training because they want to be able to tick the boxes. And we started there, no, we believe in actually this kind of development, which is something that Bill has been doing for decades, and also my colleague Jane has been doing for 30 years. And now it's opening up. Now it's kind of now there is an interest, and I think the pandemic actually had a really big impact because suddenly the things that the illusions were brought to daylight. Of that, I've had customers before who say no, they can predict the future, and so kind of a lot of those things were brought to daylight, and there suddenly was a need to be able to work in different ways and deal with that complexity and uncertainty. And who knows what is the right and the wrong? You can just only do it and see what happens. So I think I have a few more slides that I'd like to share. Maybe they then move into just complete conversational mode. And this is what I already said about the later action logic is not a guarantee. If we only have a late action logic, but we don't have any leadership experience, if we don't put ourselves into it and those things, it doesn't mean we are able to transform ourselves and organizations. But it is more likely that people who operate at later action logic, if they want to have the capacity to then facilitate transformation. And this is an important part. You were talking about consultants as well. I think especially Peter Hawkins have been talking much about the need for consultants and coaches to grow and develop their action logic. And he refers to Bill's work as well. Of course, Bill is not the only one who has done this work. And ICF put in those, like some of these into the capacities or the skills. But there is a need for kind of much more of this kind of development. So, and then I know I've said it, but I'm again going to say we are not one action logic. We act out of a center of gravity. We might have a fallback that we mostly, if we're in stress, we act out of that action logic. And we might have an emergent when we are in a really great environment that is supporting us, we might act out of later action logic. We talk about earlier and later, not higher and lower. And every action logic has a beauty and a shadow. So no one is better or worse in the action logic. It's just that the later ones have more tolerance for complexity, for uncertainty, stress. They tend to be more resilient and function better in complexity. And if you are familiar with the teal movement and the self-organizing movement, that is at least here in Europe and in Finland is a big boom. And Frederick's work, reinventing organization, there is a connection between the transforming action logic and teal. So actually, Frederick says in the book that there's two things that you need in an organization to be able to move towards the teal level. And one of them is that the owners or the ones in power are behind it because it might take a hit. And the other one is that the CEO or whoever is the one who is facilitating and holding the space for transformation looks at the world from the transforming action logic. And this is something people who want to do this often tend to overlook and more look at what is what are the benchmarks, and I'm going to try and do the same. But in order to, and I've seen this in the organizations where I work as where I am as a chair of the board, of the advisory board, that when the CEO moves into transforming action logic, it actually changes the whole organization. And then I wanted to give, I said I could have a few things that I could market. So the first is, and if the link doesn't work here, maybe we can send out to everybody just where people can sign up if you want to do the shifting horizons.
We can do that in the thank you email, absolutely.
Right, great. So we have just created a kind of self-assessment tool that is to be both have an experience of reflection, but also to be able to assess your developmental stage. And then it gives you the answers, it gives you an indicative of what is action logic based on your answers. And then there is a small report that is a unique report. It's a report, the different for the different action logic. So what are the things you might do if you want to develop? So we are offering this for everybody who's here for free and everybody who signed up. So you just sign up and we're going to send you the link and you can do it by yourself. The other thing that I wanted to share is, now we're going to, We are actually having 2 workshops one in September and one in October, where we certify people who want to use this framework in their work or just learn about them. So we have the one which is about action inquiry, the action logics, and the GLP, September 28th and 30th, where Bill is going to be also online. So the 2.5-day workshop where you really learn in an embodied way about the action logics. And so you have some pre-read. And then the week after, we're doing a workshop for those who took the previous one or have done it before or actually knows this work a little bit, something looking at it through teams and organizations. So how do I work? People come in with a case and actually work through action inquiry and action logics to work on their own case and work from other people. And this is a really exciting workshop. I can tell you, we've done that already 2 times. And then here is the book that I was referring to, which is, as far as I know, it was just a researcher telling me that she did not know any other than actually was in this sphere of work that looked at more of the practice. So with this, I want to say thank you, and I'm very happy to continue the conversation here.
I'm curious, Heidi, about when we want to, if the right word is, activate one of the action logics consciously in any part of our life. What's a good starting point for that?
Or not having one?
By having it, like, for example, if I want to step more into transforming, what's a way that does an accountability buddy help? Something like that to help you reflect and keep you on track when you want to activate one of the areas.
This is where I think it tends to be very individual, because some might have very much of the accountability from others, from like that is something you're holding on to, and it might be something actually to let go of. But there might be people who are not kind of disciplined, and it's a help. So, but for some people, it's great. I think that you would have some other people who you're engaging in inquiry with, and through that you would then have the accountability of you saying, okay, we have developmental conversations here together. Does that help? Yeah.
It does, thank you.
Yeah. And I'm saying this because when we move between redefining and transforming, we might have something that we hold on to that has come from an earlier action logic that is actually being in the way of our development. So there might be quite a lot of letting go as well in these action logics. So letting go of beliefs, of letting go of the kind of forms. But a great way is like, what is your new creative way of looking at it? If you did it from a completely new stance or perspective, how would you do that?
Anyone else, any questions, curiosities? Heidi, some people had to drop off, and they're in different time zones, etc. Everyone that's dropped off has said what great information it is. A number of people have even messaged me saying, I love these slides. There's so much on them, and they're presented really nicely as well. What a great session. It's interesting because at the start you were saying it's 2 hours and we've got like 4 minutes left, and it's just gone like that. thank you from all of us. Really interesting. I personally look forward to doing the self-assessment profile. We will send all that out. We can send out the book as well in the thank you email. And anyone else wish to say anything before we close?
Yes, Heidi, thank you so much. Thank you, Claire, for making this happen. You know, I was nagging about this for the past 1 year. I said, please let's have somebody expert in this specific field, action logic and action inquiry, to come in and talk to us about it. And this really opened a new horizon. I had the book, I tried reading it, but now I'm going to read it with a different lens. So thank you, Heidi. Thank you.
And just to share as well, we have these sessions every month. This month you've got 2. On the 28th, we've got one of those topics that, if I'm speaking as Nanny McPhee, you know, the nanny looking after the children, she said something like, if you need me but do not want me, I will stay. If you want me but do not need me, I will go. And the topic on the 28th of June is actually GDPR, data protection. And it's a topic that we all need to attend. And sometimes people are, oh, that's boring, or, you know, is that a priority for me right now? ICF follow it, all the professional bodies follow it. The laws globally are actually merging together around this. So 28th is that topic, and I will send out the rest of the session dates for the year. Heidi, really enjoyed it. I've written 7 pages of notes. So there we go. And I'll be returning to them. Is there anything you want to say just to close?
I want to just say thank you to you, Claire, and for inviting me, and thank you everybody here for being together on this journey. And maybe I send an extra thank you to you, Rebecca, because we might actually have met in Halifax back in, we found out in the breakout room. So thanks. It has been a pleasure to be here. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Have a fabulous day, evening, afternoon, wherever you are, and we'll see you on the 28th. Thank you, Heidi.
Thank you. Bye-bye.